kindly please go on mute and please switch off the video. Thank you so much. Manisha?
Yes. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the launch of the book, The Indian Boss at Work by Steve Korea. Um, like, I mean, most books for publishers are very special, but this one is extra special. We started this journey quite some time ago, about a year ago, and here we are at the launch of this book. Um, Steve Korea, the author, has put in all his 2 decades of experience in the topic of leadership into this book, and he has been also he's also had the opportunity to be interviewing a lot of leaders, Indian leaders, who've given him inputs on what Indian leadership is about, and what are the traits of Indian leaders, and all of that is in this book. And therefore this book is very special, and we are hoping, Sage hopes that a lot of people will read this book. So there are two, very important people here who can talk about this book. So I won't really talk further about it. So let me just do the introductions. So our guest of honor here today is Mr. Sandeep Das. He is a successful and highly regarded international CEO and strategic thought leader. He was the CEO of Hutchison Max Telecom, later Vodafone India, and Group CEO and Board Director of Maxis Group of Companies Malaysia, and also the MD and CEO of Reliance Jio. He was awarded the Best Malaysian CEO in 2012. He was listed among 100 most powerful people in telecom globally by the Global Telecoms magazine for 4 years. He was awarded Lifetime Achievement Award for his contribution to Indian Telecom in 2016. Currently, he holds independent directorship and advisory positions in leading companies and global consultancies. We also have here the author of the book, Steve Korea. Steve is an experienced corporate professional with more than 30 plus years of professional experience working within organizations and also as an executive coach. His educational background includes, XLRI, a Chevening scholarship, a certification from NTL on organizational development. He's also a professional member of Sumedas, and like I said earlier, coach as well. He has been in the senior leadership roles at Diageo, Jio, Patni, Vodafone, and has worked in Hindustan Lever and Xerox as well. So we are delighted to have Sandeep and Steve here today, who have agreed to share their perspectives on discovering Indianness and the Indian leader. Like I said, this talk is going to revolve around the book that is being launched today. It is called The Indian Boss at Work. And without further ado, I'll pass on I'll hand over to Sandeep, who will be now talking about the book. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Manisha, for the very, very generous introduction. Thank you very much. I'm very, very humbled. I also want to congratulate Steve and you for this very momentous occasion where you finally managed to get this book through in a very difficult time. It's not the ideal time to launch books which are done physically, but I think you have done a wonderful job trying to get it together like this. But in this manner, Steve is able to get all his friends across on one screen, from Finland to Canada to everywhere. So Steve, you should feel grateful. Good evening to everybody, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming here and shoring up support for Steve for what is his maiden voyage, and hopefully a long and illustrious voyage as an author, business author. And some of us are here for sheer curiosity to know what he has written. And then others are here for our fondness for Steve the man. And of course, like many of you here, I'm here for all the three reasons. And so I'm honored to preside this today. Steve, thank you very much for the honor. I'm very touched.
I'm honored, Sandeep.
I must let you, I must say that a little while ago, I heard Ashim saying that Steve asked him to stay quiet. Well, similarly, Steve did not want me to express any views on the book, but instead he asked me to do some caricatures. So the book carries a caricature which I have done. And this caricature is that of a half Indian, half Occidental person if you put a card in the middle. And the other side is, of course, the quintessential Indian lady executive and the international lady. So this is just a depiction of Steve's work. And Steve has often seen me doodling in office, and they all know that whenever I doodled, I actually concentrated the most. A lot of people, of course, thought I was distracted. So I'm very pleased that this has come out today. Steve and I have had plenty of time to talk about a number of things. We've worked together twice. Once in erstwhile Hutchison, which later on became Vodafone. And we were there during the creation and launch of the brands Hutch and Orange in India. And subsequently, we worked together in Reliance Jio. Now, these were studies in real contrast. You know, while Hutchison in many ways had a lot of MNC moorings, Reliance was as Indian as it gets. And of course, now Reliance Jio stories are on Ivy League case studies. So on a number of occasions, Steve and I actually spent time getting insights into leadership styles, organizational culture, behavior of people. And they were very, very stimulating conversations, and it was a great learning. When I reflect over my own 4.5 decades of work, in many ways, for people who are of my vintage or maybe a little older, you'll realize that the like droves of invaders came to India, you know, right from the time of the Aryans to Alexander to the Afghans, the Turks, name them, everybody came till the time the British were here. We've actually, in the corporate life, also have had a number of influences. You know, when I kind of started work, the multinational was, you know, those typical British multinationals. You know, they were the legacy of spit and polish, where you had the quintessential autocratic chief executive, and there was companies like BAT, ITC, Unilever, Burma Shell, Metalbox, Dunlops, Indian Oxygen. Those are the kind of companies that were supposed to be creme de la creme. And, you know, it was typical to have club memberships, play a bit of tennis, have gin and tonic in the afternoon, and very, very hierarchical structures. When I joined DCM as a management trainee, I had a chairman who was actually, because of his manufacturing background, he was very enamored by the Japanese style of management. So then we got introduced to Japan and its practices. And later on, I worked for Toyota Motor Corporation. And so words like Muda, Muri, Kanban, Judoka, they all started becoming part of our vocabulary. But more importantly, we learned how Japan had translated its culture and spirituality into management practices. So it was another matter that we sort of learned how to eat teppanyaki and sushi and how to navigate with our chopsticks on bento boxes. But the fact was that the Japanese style was a non-star, all of us in the form of a military organization working together, which was a completely different organizational style. There were no star individuals, there were star teams. And then, of course, the Americans invaded all of us. And suddenly I used to find Forbes and Fortune magazines on the hands of the corporate people. People like Jack Welch, Alfred Janine, Iacocca were all becoming icons. We were talking about the best practices of GE, Pepsi, Coke, Amex, Citibank, Morgan, Merrill. And suddenly we had left tennis and we were playing golf and we were having burgers and we were having Napa Valley wines. And it was a completely different style of management, which actually, and then a lot of us went to Ivy Leagues, a lot of our children went to study abroad, a lot of them came into India, a lot of multinationals actually came into India. So that changed the way in which we had to deal with them. But now we are in a situation where we have people who come in with round neck shirts, torn jeans, bring dogs to the office, sit on bean bags, and you know, the organizations have collapsed to become matrix organizations. Anybody can talk to anybody. I think there's been a democratization of ideas, and you know, now the philosophy is to fail fast. Time has become asymmetric, and it is a completely different world of the Amazons and the Facebooks and the Googles. So actually, if you look at the Indian diaspora, the manner in which we as a nation have held together our civilization with various people coming in, even in corporate life, we have had to deal through various phases of changes. And I think when I look back at my generation, we've really straddled this pretty well across the way and adapted ourselves, which is why today we see the colonization of corporate America. We see Indian CEOs there. And as if that wasn't enough, we have now seen a drove of outstanding Indian lady executives who have started taking on big roles. So I've always wondered, though, and despite the fact that we've had, we always talk about successful Indian businessmen in Hong Kong and East Africa and in England and, the so-called the Mittals and the Hindujas, nobody has ever thought seriously about the Indian style of management. We've always scoffed at it. We've always felt that, this is very desi. It's not stylish enough. And I don't know why, despite the fact that we've had things like the very successful single entry Partha system of the Birlas, where they knew cash every day, till such time Harvard Business School said, sit on cash. This was there all along in the Indian business. They always knew at the beginning of the day how much cash was there in each of their operations. Words like bandobast, words like jogad have become bad words when they were actually words which meant innovation, street smartness, and getting things fixed. So I've always wondered why nobody wrote something about this philosophically. Even when we were at Orange and Hutch, and here I must give credit to Oshim for the fact that he actually indoctrinated us into the philosophy of what Orange is all about. And we actually, despite using the philosophy and the DNA of Orange, we actually Indianized it by doing things like Chota Recharge, etc., which did not mean that we became Indian in our mannerism, but we became very Indian in the way that we actually dealt with consumers. So things have changed. And I must say that Steve's book is very well researched and a painstaking effort. While it also makes reflected reading for many practicing CEOs in a way, I would say, for them to validate their Indian selves. And at the same time, it instills confidence in a lot of young executives who are sort of starting out their work and their business to get in touch with what I call their Indian souls and understand and get self-belief and believe that these are the right things for us to do. Be actually the manifestation of Indian spirituality, the Indian way of doing things, yet the smartness, the resilience, the ability to deal with change all the time. I mean, we've operated through things like MRTP, licensing, etc. We are a very, very resilient bunch. Besides being resilient, we have an enormous capacity to operate in abstraction, not knowing what the future is going to be. And that's a great quality that actually makes us very tenacious individuals and executives, if you really ask me. So Steve's book, besides what it does for practicing managers, is, I think, a wonderful textbook material. Steve could have got a doctoral thesis out of this, actually, because he should actually be honorably awarded a PhD for this, because it's a lot of research and a lot of work and a lot of interviews. I remember years ago, probably a decade and a half ago, before Rajiv Suri was the CEO of Nokia, before him there was a Finn gentleman called Olli-Pekka. And I remember at a dinner I was sitting next to Olli-Pekka, and Olli-Pekka said to me that when he was graduating, he asked his father in Finland, "Where should I go?" And his father pointed in the direction of United States and said, "Go west." And he said, what's strange is that 3 decades later, when his son came to him after graduating from an Ivy League college in the US, his son came and asked him the same question. And Olli-Pekka said, "Go east." And so his son landed up in Singapore. Now that tells you, that reminds me of what Kwame Nkrumah said. He said, "We face neither east nor west. We face forward." So with that, I must now say that, Steve, congratulations on your book. And this is going to be an exciting thing for people to read. And, Steve, people must be eager to know what you have to say about your book. And therefore, before I start, I must tell you that I'm very moved by a quote which was in Alvin Toffler's book, where he said that the illiterate of the future will not be those who don't know how to read or write, but the illiterate of the future will be the one who doesn't know how to learn, unlearn, and relearn. I'm sure in this mammoth effort that you have put in your book, it must have been a journey of great, great learning. So tell me, Steve, how does it feel today?
It feels awesome. It feels awesome. Uh, you know, Ashim, in the year 2000, or I think it was one of the XCOM meetings, when he used a phrase saying, if I could take a picture of this particular moment, and we talked about business, of course, at that point of time. And for me, this is that picture today, 25th, 5 p.m., a picture that I had seen for over a year and a half when I was writing the book. And for me, it's a very great moment to be able to be with this community of friends, well-wishers, colleagues. All of you have taken time to be here. To each of you, thank you very much. It feels very, very good. Thank you.
So, Steve, you've quoted quite copiously and generously from Indian scriptures and Indian philosophy. And as Swami Vivekananda said, do not seek, neither seek nor avoid. Take what comes. So now tell me, this was your calling. So why did you write this book?
I refer to 3 incidents in the book as to what caused the blowing into the ember and starting this fire within. I think it was back in 2011 when I was in an NHRD conference that there was a global speaker that spoke about a leadership practice. And like most of us, like Sandeep spoke a little while back, somebody raised his hand and asked a question and said that, we are Indians, we have a leadership, we have great leadership wisdom over 7,000 years. We should be following an own indigenous way of how to manage ourselves. Everybody in the crowd, at least 8 or 10 people, they all raised their voice and said, yeah, that's absolutely right. And then to my embarrassment and to the embarrassment of everyone, he asked if anyone in the audience would come up on stage and say a few things about Indianness. Somebody finally got up, went to the stage and said a few things. I don't know what it was, Chanakya or something or the other. But at that moment, I experienced a moment of epiphany. I realized, speaking to others, that our basic foundation of Indianness is very weak, though we unconsciously follow it. And I wondered if, the things that Sandeep talked about, Jugaad and, resilience and the cosmic holism, our kind of hierarchical distances, power distances, our spirituality, do they all have relevance in contemporary management practice? Or were they just some stuff that's ancient and obscure? And that set me on a boat on the river of adventure. There have been other incidents that I write in the book. But you may have the best of intention to write. You may have lots of ideas. But I must say something very magical happened. One day, inspiration, if I can say, visited. And for a long time, I had not given her space. And, she sat by my side, welcoming me to write about what I thought and my years of experience. So as I started to join the dot, actually more and more things got revealed. To her, I owe a lot of what has happened. There have been also earth angels. I mean, Manisha, for example, Neha, they have really pushed me to be bold. To be able to look at both the ethic and the emic literature and bring them together, an outside lens and an inside indigenous lens. They've encouraged me to validate the notion of Indianness and the concepts I positioned and asserted in my book. That while they might be very powerful, are they validated by stalwart leaders in the country, and do they actually have that Indianness? And therefore, to bring a practical side to that aspect. I mean, there are other people like Nina, who's perhaps on the call today, who might have edited my words, but not my voice. And to all of them, it's been a source of tremendous amount of support and well-wish and best wishes I've received. There is R.R. Dyer on the call. He's actually sat me down and worked through the entire psychology Manovigyan chapter. There's Zayed Ganji, who also looked through work. And Anand Nayak is on the call, who read through my very untidy bits in the beginning and pushed me and asked me whether was I having a slant to just one kind of India in my mind. There's of course Oshim, who you can always expect to give you a pushback, and he said, "Are you looking beyond your nose and looking outside too, and multiple perspectives?" So I cannot name all the people that have helped support this book. I might have authored it, but it's certainly been on the support of many others. So that's really why I wrote the book, and my real hope is that for all of us, we are able to identify our own Indianness and our own personal leadership, and to be able to bring that to bear. Yes, Sandeep.
So, Steve,
long answer.
Yeah, thank you. That was, that's really a wonderful way to describe your calling. You know, Steve, there is a very famous American television host, and her name is Genevieve Gorder. And when she saw this Alhambra carpet, she said something that reminded me of what I'm going to ask you next, which she said, when East meets West, amazing design happens. And this is a rug, so it's an analogy. And she said the Alhambra rug is a marriage of the clear thinking and simplicity of Western graphic design meets complexity and beauty of Eastern pattern. So why don't you tell us about the subtitle, Thinking Global, Acting Indian?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Sandeep. I think at one level, when we use the word East and West, perhaps one obvious mistake would be to think of it of, west of Turkey and east of Turkey and think I'm talking of geographies. What I mean by East and West is an approach, an orientation, a way of looking, a darshana, a kind of orientation. And I want to say this to all of you, that inside us, we have a Western thinking and we have an Eastern thinking. Western because of our Western English education, the fact that we are in a postmodern world, the fact that the workplace today is built on leadership principles that come from a Western world. And we also have 7,000 years of a river which is a primary axis. And we may be unconscious of that primary axis. A river that has got multiple histories of assimilation, of syncretic absorption that has in many ways influenced, not shaped, the way we think, feel, and act. And because of the kal, the time, and with the time the social character, like what Eric Fromm talks about, or whether Yuvari talks about, the dominant ideas of the time. We have dominant ideas in India, like respect for elders, keep your shoes outside. And I've listed about 15 or 16 dominant ideas, which we just believe to be absolutely true. What's there to question about it? The desha, that there are differences in terms of a south, north, east, because of the class, the culture, the ethnic background. It's a very different perspective in terms of the ethnic card of the desha. And finally, the patra. A patra English conversion could be maybe a trait or a competency, but in India, it talks about the temperaments, the kind of a triguna of the sattvic, tamasic, and the rajasic elements of the being. And when you look at on one side, this primary axis of 7,000 years, and then the secondary axis, to the point that Sandeep was making, they can either become a beautiful fusion, a weave, a fabric, or it can create contradictions, polarities, dilemmas, confusion, and what we call as dharam sankatas. For example, do I put my boot on someone's neck, or do I be diplomatic? Do I fire people during the COVID because it's useful and rational to do so in a P&L sheet, or do I act with sensitivity? So these pulls and push are really the two aspects of our being that we are constantly in touch with. And I argue in my book that the effective leader is one who is able to bring that samtulan between the two what appears to be apparent contradictions and disparate polarities. But those who can hold that east and west within succeed, and those who cannot and lean towards the east or lean towards the west end up becoming Trishankus, like that handsome king who was neither in heaven nor in hell. And that's the argument I make about. So what I advocate in my book is that there is a need today, more so than ever before, for the Harvard as well as for the Rishi of the Gurukul to come together to create what I would call the Rajeshri model, a model that brings sensitivity, empathy in the world that we are going into. Today, if you look at, Heidrick struggles, Egon Zehnder, and all the data that we are reading, they are being called not to hire people just on IQ or on terms of experience, but now the leaders of tomorrow are being called on to have these qualities of empathy, sensitivity, and the ancient Indian wisdom of Shubh Labh, the world is one family, Sangatan, and the fact that we all can be happy together, Ahimsa, Dharma, are essential wisdom that we need for our times and in the times to come. And therefore, when I say thinking global, I'm not talking about being westernized or advanced in the world. The Western model of literature comes from the Second World War, mostly from North America and Europe, mostly from academia, mostly written by male, and researched on weird participants. Weird because they are Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. But the fact is that the workplace doesn't have feminine principles. The fact is that the whole world is not weird. And therefore, we have a universal core theory of leadership that is sought to be explaining for the rest of the world, and done so by people like von Strompener, like Hofstede, like the Globe Studies. But the reality is, when you look at indigenous psychology in India, you start to then look at some of the fundamental flaws, and I point out many such what is acceptable universal theories do not apply in the context of India because of our distinctive Kal, Desh, and Patra. For example, Oedipus complex doesn't apply. There's a maternal instinct, and so on and so forth. So when I say global thinking, and it's really about being able to look at global from an ecological perspective, about looking at beyond, not looking at and leaning towards the West. That's not what I meant by global. No, but the fact is that today the younger people in a postmodern world have that opportunity of being able to really pick both these aspects and integrate it. That's really the title of it.
It's interesting you say this, Steve, because you in a sense you don't want to compartmentalize East and West, and I'm reminded of a similar thought and feeling that I experienced when I did mention to you. I don't know whether she's on the call. My sister-in-law Nilima Bhatt wrote a book on Shakti leadership. And in that book, very easily people tend to think that when you look at Shakti leadership, you look at feminine traits, whereas she said that, a leader actually embodies male traits and female traits as well. And so therefore, in a sense, there is no distinction. It doesn't make you effeminate or doesn't make you masculine. So it's interesting that you put it in this context, and it's very exciting. But tell me something. This morning, I was just thinking about the so-called Indian leaders, and I was trying to put them in some buckets. And the one bucket I had was, traditionally when you talk of Indian leaders, you talk about the Ambanis, the Tatas, the Birlas, the Mahindras, the Mariwalas, the Adanis, the Bajajes, and the Sunil Mittals of the world, and Azim Premji. That's one bucket of owner leaders. And then you have two different sets of leaders. You have sets of leaders who are made in India leaders. I mean, if you look at the Narayan Murthy's, the Nandan Nilankanis, the K.V. Kamath, H.D. Parekh, Aditya Puri, the recent ones, the Bansals, Sharmas, and the Agarwals of the startup world, and Kiran Shaw, and most recently, Ashok Soota. And then there is another bucket, which is the born in America and bred in America CEOs, which is the Indira Nooyi, Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella, internationally neo-modern leaders. And I'm not going back to the JJ Iranis and Rusi Modis of the world because that was a different era. So I'm trying to grapple and say, okay, Steve, what is this unique Indian leader which we are talking about?
Thanks, Sandeep. And I want to just correct the word unique, because unique means very special and only our property. I want to use the word distinctive, and you'll find this in other parts of the world, mostly in the eastern part of the world, but certainly in many ways larger presence of it in India itself and the diaspora that's outside. When I look at, for example, one orientation, and it's all about orientations. A rule is a rule is a rule, and therefore everyone should be equal. In our Indian leadership style, there is this whole concept of it. We keep saying it all depends, because A.R. Ramanujan actually clarified that the Indian way of thinking is it all depends. It's context specific, and like the river Gangotri, it will come quickly when the slope is very much, or it will widen, or it will go over rocks and become a rapid, or it will plummet and become a waterfall. I think that's a good analogy for what Indian leaders are. We are this in this situation, we are that in that situation, and we are more. We are therefore like a diamond model of facets that lend itself to different situations. We shine in different situations, and we have Dharma, which is India's word to the world. Dharma is everything about being context, and we have Kula Dharma, we have stations of life for Dharma, multiple forms of Dharma, including how to act in an emergency in terms of the Appa Dharma. And therefore, even Mahatma Gandhi itself said to the British that I reject the legal law, despite him being a barrister, because he said that, look, I believe in the supreme justice. So when I look at, therefore, the Indian leader, and I've broken it down into DESI, LEADER, and then I've opened up each of them, and my entire book is about explaining each of them. For example, the first one is he is directive and yet nurturant, and that speaks to the fact that all of us as Indians actually have a very big father figure, which is the Karta at home. And who is our dad? Our dad is the person who is a little aloof, strict, disciplinarian, high values, and always takes care of bringing the money home and being able to support us, etc., and caring and nurtured and protective. And willy-nilly, this kind of behavior is projected, introjected, transferred, counter-transferred into the organization, and the boss becomes dad. And no wonder if the boss swallows it as becomes dad, the ending up of sibling rivalry in terms of passive aggression, in terms of politics, and so on, continues to play. And if you look at the Karta model, JPP Sinha has actually said that that's the model that works for India. The charismatic model that is touted in the West is in India becomes narcissistic. The laissez-faire leadership is actually an absentee landlord, and many other forms have been tried to be tested. But this samtulan between the adhikar and the anurag of the Karta seems to have purchased because of the power distance and the fact that Indians are willing to surrender to a power distance in terms of sneha and shraddha. And if you look at, for example, many Western, when I say Western, I look at the ethnocentric lenses by which somebody would look and say, there is a lot of power distance and they're very subservient or very reverential to you. In fact, for us as Indians, to be able to surrender to the Guru and to be able to get that shraddha and offer the sneha are essential qualities of the learning process. It's not the motivation that's there. And we see many such, if I were to shortcut the whole book and talk about what are some of the various contours of what's happening, you have power distance, you have collectivism, you have the fact that the male in India is actually a mix of male and female, and the fact that it is restrained society. It is, but at the same time, there's high individualism in the private space, and so on and so forth. And this then turns out for the leader to be contextually specific. So now coming back, Sandeep, to your question, there are professional family-based leaders who have actually done extremely well after, have been doing well, and post 91, they kept the MNCs at bay. There are folks who work for multinationals and they are Americans. The fact is that Indians are very good leaders, whether they come from family business or whether they've been trained in multinational or whether they go abroad. Because if you look at the ones who are abroad and we say, they're the brightest guys, there must be some soil stuff happening there that makes them so bright. But the reality is they are triple distillates. A, because they're engineers, MBAs, then they go there on a very arduous H-1B visa. They have come from affluent families and do not have that, that process of going through a ghetto stage. And therefore have the opportunity and in terms of income, in terms of education, they are far more better off than if you look at comparative immigrants that have come into the other countries. So no wonder then that they are doing well. And no wonder then there are leaders in India who are also doing well. And no wonder then there's a family-based structure that allows for leadership to flourish. Because some of the basic ingredients of India is hardship, jugaad, being creative, because our aspirations always exceed our resources, and we've always had to stretch the buck. We've always had to Indianize it to find the place in a country that is actually very disparate and many Indias. So if you're looking for some nouns as to what Indians are, you won't find it. If you're looking for verbs, and you're looking for the texture and the tone, that's what the book is about. And I give multiple incidents in terms of the composition of what leaders are and how they come across at the workplace. So that's, again, my answer to that, Sandeep. Maybe we should take a few questions from the audience.
So thank you, Steve. I think it's wonderful in a management discussion to hear a lot of Indian terms for a change. And that's very refreshing. And to see relevance. So, Steve, why don't we open out and see what questions have been asked?
Yeah, so we'll have to go to the chat box and let me see.
Steve, I think we should first unveil the book before we take the question and answers. So
okay.
Could you and Sandeep please hold up the book?
That's Steve's book, and so congratulations, Steve. The book is appearing to have been launched.
Very Steve, can you hear me?
Congratulations, Steve.
Hey, hearty congratulations, Steve.
Steve. Many congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Steve.
Congratulations, Steve.
I must congratulate Manisha for a very well-produced book. I mean, it's a very high-quality production. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Congratulations. Looking forward for getting the copies. I've already pre-ordered that.
Okay, Steve, can I say a word?
Sure, Shil, please.
Yeah. I just got an observation. It's not a question. The observation is that I worked closely with Steve for a decade, and he's a split personality. Okay, he's a split personality, very in some ways not exactly reminiscent of of the pictures that Sandeep showed, but the one side of Steve, is a hardcore old lever personnel man, not HR man, personnel man. It's kick ass, get things done, cut the shit. Okay, that's one side of Steve. The other side of Steve is a frustrated academic. And Steve had a successful career as a professional, as a practicing, call it personnel, call it HR professional. And now, Steve, you are now finally able to indulge yourself in the academic side, and I wish you long success in this second avatar of yours.
Thank you, Ashik. Thank you. Would someone like to voice the question? I'm struggling with the chat box, but or somebody else can read out the question.
Steve, this is Akhil here. Congratulations.
Yes, Akhil. Thanks, Akhil.
You talked about contradictions. Which are the instances that come out while you're researching that you find something that is so non-Indian, yet behind the scene is very un-Indian? Is there any example you can share with us?
Which is non-Indian and
Like,
very,
on the
yeah,
surface,
okay.
it's very much like Indian practice, but you realize that no, this is actually pseudo-Indian.
So let me share. For example, in the workplace, because the entire system happens to be built around Western principles and that's steeped in quite deeply, all of us as corporate leaders end up with following some of the policies and the rules that are there. But unconsciously, at one level, there is some amount of tension and polarity and contradictions. For instance, when it comes to the performance management system, we don't want to actually sometimes put it down in writing. I have personally struggled with leaders where they did not want to sharply use the normal curve and discriminate against them. We have the broadband, which is supposed to collapse all the various grades into 4 or 5, and yet within the band we have put mezzanine grades and done a very Indian way of solving for what is required. We call it customer-facing designation, and then end up giving people very high-fly designations and so on. So in many ways, in many ways, we have an Indian way of being able to resolve some of the dilemmas that's there in the Western practice that's given to us, and so on. And some organizations that have not fully understood the culture, the Kal, the Desh, the Patra, and put out comments like have a backbone, for instance, take on your boss. It becomes simply difficult for someone in the middle of a meeting to just take on his boss. He has to be Birbal and go to Akbar quietly and say, sir, you spoke well, but these are one or two things that I'd like to suggest to you. And therefore, a kind of a model which says, this is the kind of thing that should happen. So the one of the reasons why Indian leaders have to succeed, especially when they're dealing with multinationals, with other organizations, they're constantly having to make that adjustment. And when you read the spotlight interviews, or let's say Manu's on this call, for example, and Manu himself has shared many examples of when he's dealing with the global interface and with the Indian interface, there's a particular style and shift and adjustment that one has to make in being able to manage these contradictions and polarities and so on. And I'm not calling these polarity contradictions as something that is bad or negative, Akhil. These are inevitable processes when you have two cultures that are intertwined, and there is, as Sandeep was saying, a movement to move forward. It's bound to be that pull-push kind of relationship, a tensibility mandala, if you like.
Thank you, Steve. Your passion shows.
Who wants to ask me the next question? Akhil, will you help me with the... Yeah.
Hi, Steve. This is Kavita. Can you hear me?
Yes, Kavita.
Congratulations, Steve. Such an awesome moment.
Thank you.
So my question is, what is your most cherished memory while you were writing the book? Anything specific that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think, when you write a book like a Hindi movie, you shoot all the shots in the first 3 months, and then you do the editing and the music and so on. I wrote my book in the first 4 months, and then Manish and I had a tremendous amount of engagements and so on. I think when I look at the cherishing moments is when I started to look at my own sentences and then started to look for research, ethic and emic, to validate, to expose the elephant in the room, to look at multiple perspectives, what in journalism is called Sayadwada. And when I started to find that there was that linkage with what I was seeing, observing with my own eyes and my own observations and being validated by literature, I felt very euphoric, especially so when I heard the leaders talk about how they continuously drew on their Indianness in being able to be relevant, both in the Indian geography as well when they have been working outside. So it felt good to, because I was very careful that I wasn't giving my own bias, my own prejudice, my own observation, but that I was reflecting the voices of what truly is, rather than just what truly belongs to me. Thank you for that, Kavita.
It's wonderful. Thanks, Steve. All the best.
Hi, Steve.
Can I
This is
Yeah.
Dr. Sanjeev.
Hi, Dr. Sanjeev.
How are you?
I'm very good.
More power to you for becoming an author and launching your book, Indian Bosses. My question to you would be that if you have to add one chapter in hindsight in this book to make it much more holistic and useful for the larger audience or the target audience, what that chapter read as?
Well, that's quite easy. I wrote Sanjeev 1,30,000 words. The final book is only about 85,000 words. And the parts that I had to take out step by step was the entire history chapter. I wrote the whole history of India because I wanted the whole history to be explained in the way it ought to be. Our history is distorted. There's everything wrong about the way our history is. I mean, there's everything wrong about the way it's been understood through ethnocentric lenses. And I began to write. But then at some point of time, I realized I was talking history and not the Indian manager and so on. And, Manisha and I, we both talked about it and we took it out. Maybe my next book would be about history, Indian history.
Thank you.
Who's that laughing?
Any references for the history
Hello.
that you got? Or-
Steve, this is Gautam.
Yes, Gautam. Hello.
First, congratulations on your launch of the book. And this question is to you and Sandeep, the sir both. So do you think that Indian leaders are more operation savvy if you compare with the setting of the direction or the strategy? I mean, like they are more focused on operation than the strategy. So do you feel so? What's your view?
You're saying Indians are more operational rather than strategic.
That's right. That while setting
or-
of a strategy, they
Yeah.
score less compared with while they drive operation.
Okay, you want to go first, Sandeep, or shall I go first?
No, it's your day today.
Thank you. See, in one of the Desi leadership acronym mnemonic, I mentioned that Indians are long-term and short-term. And this is a very rare combination of being very mindful of long-term and short-term. We talk to many managers, let's say from Pepsi, Oshim will say to you that there are five drivers for the day. The truck must move, the money must be collected, the cash must come in, and every day the money is in the till, that money is yours. Indians are focused with short term and making certain they don't let a penny go adrift. But Indians are also extremely strategic in terms of looking at because it comes from our collectivism, it comes from a long term orientation, it comes from the very fact that in terms of our Kal, Desh, and Patra itself, we have a longer horizon in terms of that. You look at some of the vision of the Tata Group from the beginning, or look at Mr. Ambani, for instance, and starting from his father, and so on. And you look at some of the various leaders that, in terms of the long shot that they have taken, it clearly calls about vision. Narayan Murthy, in terms of how he saw the IT revolution and then cashed onto it at the nascent stage. So I don't see that as a problem. I think it's being very unfair to look at the leader only in terms of just operation. That's not true. The data is clearly pointing out that that he has a mix of both strategic long term as well as the operational side of him.
I would like to add that post the colonial rule, Indians tended to be order takers and not question authority. As a result of which, during the early parts of our business, people were only doing what they were asked to do, and they had abdicated from strategic thinking, except for a few emancipated industrialists and visionaries. But I would say now the scenario has changed completely. Indians have become very, very strategic in their thought, and I think it's a welcome change right now. Actually, I would not say that we are purely execution oriented, although there are some parts of our execution that leaves much to be desired, but might think that now we are probably becoming more strategic.
Okay, so I'm
Steve,
just,
hi, Sanjeev.
yeah.
So, Steve, is this self-congratulatory part a kind of a inherent in the Indian bosses? Well, frankly speaking, when I look at the country around us, it's one of the most unequal countries in the world. We might be talking about a huge amount of demographic dividends and all nonsense, but the reality is there's a 10-12% of the country which is kind of a middle class. 88% of the country is still kind of struggling to make the ends meet. So I'm saying when you look at this Indian boss as a construct, what are your thoughts about Indian bosses extended to the political and the social space?
So, Sanjeev, I have no data points for political and social spaces, and I've stayed away from even examining that. I've confined all of my leadership in terms of absolutely in terms of the corporate and at the workplace itself. Yeah. When you say self-congratulatory, I am with you. When I state in my book that there are very small percentages of leaders who actually are able to integrate both sides of them. Alas, a large number of Indian leaders actually fail to be able to make that shift as to what got them here to get them to go where they need to go next. So that's true. When we look at various leadership models, because of what's happening in India, we have some leaders who are effective and are able to operate perhaps in the professionally run businesses, and the professionally run businesses are at best, Sanjeev, as you and I both know, not more than 10 to 15,000. But for the rest of India, what do you look at in terms of leadership there? But there are fabulous, inspiring stories of leadership. When you look at stories of Renana Ben and what she has been able to do in Seva, where you have 1.87 million women who act as grassroots leaders in terms of self-reliance and self-dependence. And it is those stories, day in and day out, that inspire me about what's happening on leadership in the country from the grassroots level. And I write about that in my book, Sanjeev.
Okay.
Just conscious that we are at 5:56, more than the time that we had negotiated and I think so. If there are no other questions, shall we start winding this down?
Maybe the last question. GP Rao.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Neville.
Hi, Neville. How are you?
Steve, my question, can you hear me?
Yes, Neville, I can.
Okay. Steve, you have been one of those who had the privilege of going to XLRI. So you've been schooled in, the Western management concepts and so on. And then, of course, you've grown. You're an intelligent person. You reflect on your experiences and so on. And when I was going through very briefly through your manuscript that you sent me, what struck me is that, you're a person who was influenced by the Western management thinking. And then you are trying to look at your Indian experiences, find a rationale for certain behaviors of people, and you're trying to link them to certain, socio-cultural realities and religious realities of Indians. And from that perspective, trying to bring in an Indian perspective, how an Indian manager behaves. And I think that's wonderful. That was a wonderful experience, just reading through it and getting in touch with that. However, what I wanted to ask you is just like, Mr. Das said, the Japanese have their own system of management. I don't know if you are aware of Professor S.K. Chakrabarty from IIM Calcutta, who made an attempt to teach human values, but he made an attempt in value system and try to see how he can come out with an Indian management system. Now, link that to what you've put forward in your book as an of respect.
Tomorrow morning, I was asking you that tomorrow morning around 9:30.
Steve, this is GP Rao.
Sorry, can you go on mute?
I think Sanjay is on call. He should mute. This is GP Rao.
Yeah, I want to just answer Neville. Neville, I missed your last sentence. Can you just repeat that?
I said, so there is an attempt to come out with, and now, you know, the director of IIM Kozhikode, who was a classmate of mine,
Yes,
Debashish Chatterjee,
yes.
he also is trying to carry this forward. If you read some of his books
Yes.
and so on, out with an Indian system of management, you know,
Yes.
just
Yes.
like the Japanese. Now,
Yes.
have you tried to incorporate some of that also, some of those ideas to try to look at, you know, the behavior of Indian managers and link it to this concept of the Desi leader that you speak about?
Yeah. So Neville, you're right in saying that much of my background is very Western and it has strong prejudices and bias and leanings on a Western thinking. And at the same time, many of the Western concepts, especially when I was in process work with ISISD and Somedas and others, and with my own exposure to people, I seem to find it at odds and not stacking up with what I was actually seeing and the way managers are thinking, feeling, and acting in the workplace. Now, with regards to the value-based, I am not saying that one or the other. I started the conversation by saying that we must blend Harvard and the Rishi, the value system, together to create the Rajeshri model, which is really a sustainable model to bring heart and head and soul to the work. And I'm also saying that this is where the future leadership is where it has to go. Yes, I'm aware of S.K. Chakrabarti, Gaurav Chakrabarti, there are many other people who have always talked about value-based, and that's very strong for us in our own culture. And my book is one more brick to the efforts made by giants in taking this work forward.
Okay.
GP?
Thanks a lot.
GP?
Yeah, this is Steve. Congrats.
Thank you.
While you were, I saw that you want to call Indian way of leading is distinct. Why, if you propagate this, will we be missing out on something? If it remains truly Indian, truly distinct Indian, will you be missing out on something?
Yeah, it's a great question. The fact is, GP, that I'm saying that you are today currently using, see, if you are, let's say, in NCPA theatre in Mumbai, you're doing a Shakespeare play. The audience are Indian, the actors are Indian, the stage is Indian, and yet you're doing to be or not to be. So the fact is we are playing in a Western foreground with an Indian background. We are already doing both. And as a result, we are facing the Dharma Sankatas that are there. All I'm saying is own up, legitimize both the aspects of you. And I started by saying that the distinctiveness is the way in which we bring all of this together and to understand it, to bring the West notion inside us. And today, GP, the younger people in our country today have this opportunity to be able to work even in the workplace, which is getting more and more modern, technological, advanced, etc., and yet carry the pride and the heritage of a culture that's 7,000 years in terms of respect. And that's one of the things that you see in every walk of life. Indians continue to dominate because individually they have great critical thinking, but they're also very relational. So there is no fear. This whole notion that you bring about the Aristotelian model of either or, I reject either or. I'm saying the world is about this and that, and can we reconcile? This whole Rudyard Kipling should be thrown out of the window when he says the East is East and the West is West and the twain shall never meet. I believe we must prove Rudyard Kipling wrong.
Okay. Well, thank you. Integration. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do we have your permission to carry on? I'm just conscious that, yeah, go ahead. Who's that?
Hi, Steve. Hi, Steve. Can you hear me, Chandramohan?
Hi, Chandramohan. Hi.
First of all, congrats.
Thank you.
So what next? So we expect another book focusing on India technique suitable for new generation. And more so, why I'm asking that now we are working in a new normal environment. So we have to move post-corona probably to next normal. So are you going to touch up on those points in your next book or how it's going to work? You have any
Chandramohan,
thought of that?
thank you very much. There are many ideas that obviously are there, but you know what? My voice in this book needs to grow louder and amplified. My message in this book needs to cascade and spread. I need to nurture and give life to what I've written in the book. And you know, like when you put products out in the market, you have to make sure that it grows and nurtures. And at this point of time, all my energy is to making certain that what I've written is spread and is understood and perhaps in some way helps us in our own personal leadership. I have many ideas in my back pocket, but I don't want to go there at this point of time.